So welcome to this session that we're going to now follow up on that wonderful presentation from Marco about all the management changes that can take place, with particular focus obviously on pruning, but others as well, in order to address climate change. We're going to focus on the challenges and the opportunities that global climate change presents for the production of wine. I'm Rob Stavins, A.J. Meyer Professor of Energy and Economic Development at Harvard, where I focus on climate change, economics, and policy, but not necessarily with regard to wine production. So my role here is to serve as a moderator, and that's a joy because we have a really stellar panel of academics and producers of some great wines. So let me introduce them to you first. I'm just going to go in alphabetical order. Laura Catena, Managing Director of Bodega Catena Zapata and founder of the Catena Institute of Wine. Elisabeth Forrestel, Assistant Professor of Viticulture and Enology at the University of California at Davis. Jean-Baptiste Rivail, Chief Executive Officer of Ponzi Vineyards and Executive Vice President worldwide of Groupe Bollinger. Mark Sahn, Chief Financial Officer of E&J Gallo Winery. And last but not least, Daniel Sumner, who is the Frank Buck Distinguished Professor of Agricultural Economics, also at the University of California at Davis. I'm going to begin just by observing that maybe what's obvious to everyone here, that in nearly all economies of the world, agriculture is among, if not the most climate-sensitive sectors of the economy. And as Marco really noted in his early slides, premium wine grape production is among the most climate-sensitive of agricultural crops. So academic research ranging from plant physiology to economics is potentially very, very important. And it goes without saying that in addition to that research, which may be from the academic world, actual adaptation to climate change is necessarily going to be implemented by producers in the private sector. And that's why we have this panel that combines academics with some leading producers in the world. I'm going to start by posing a question to each of our panelists, which they'll answer relatively briefly, but in less than 5 minutes each. And that will leave us time maybe for a follow-up question or two, but certainly in going to you in the audience if you have questions for any of the panelists. I'm going to start with JB. As part of Groupe Bollinger, you're managing vineyards in Loire, in Champagne, in Burgundy, Cognac, and, last but not least, Oregon. That's a very diverse set of climates. It's also, more broadly, it's a very diverse set of terroir. How does your approach to climate change vary across these regions? Or is there a common approach you take?
Well, thank you, Professor. As Marco said very clearly, I think there is not one-size-fits-all approach for vineyard management and climate change. And what's fascinating about viticulture, I believe, is it's at the intersection of science and tradition. And for good reason, sometimes science comes with an answer, but tradition is not in agreement with that answer. So we have to balance all of that, and therefore we don't really come up with a clear pattern. That being said, we see some commonalities across the board and in all our vineyards. I think one of the biggest challenges we have right now to create some quality wines is to reach phenolic ripeness. So because it's warmer, the maturity of vine goes faster, but we don't develop the aromas we want. A good data to keep in mind is in the Loire Valley, for instance, they gain 1 day of maturity per year. That's huge, right? Means that today Loire is about the same level of climate than Bordeaux was 30 years ago. So that phenolic ripeness is one of our key challenges. There is also, across the board, a risk of frost. The frost is becoming very prevalent because, again, the frost happens when the vines are developed. It's when they're bad. And since they develop faster, there are higher chances that winter frost damage the vine. You look at Burgundy, they had 2. So it's not only more often, but it's also more damaging. So in 2016 and in 2021, 50% of Burgundy was damaged by frost. So that's another common pattern, and we address that. We use a lot of common techniques across all the vineyards to manage climate change, such as ripening earlier during the day, ripening earlier, using night picking, etc., etc., etc. There are also some differences. For example, Champagne, Premier and Grand Cru are less impacted by climate change because they tend to be on a chalky soil. So we don't have to act as much. Changes by planter. Chardonnay is less impacted than Pinot Noir, which is a more fragile plant. So we take that into consideration, of course. And it's not necessarily always bad. The Willamette Valley, for example, in Oregon, can now reach a full phenolic ripeness, which was not always the case in a previous year. So, and some terroirs of Burgundy used to be considered as being less good. Now they are, because it's warmer, they reach a better maturity. There are some external factors I want to quote. Wildfire, for example, didn't exist before. Some great estates have ceased to exist because of the wildfire risk. I'm thinking of Newton Vineyard in Napa, for example. So they had a perfect exposure to combat climate change. They were eastern facing, but in the middle of a forest. So I think that one of the key factors really is new world versus old world. In the old world, we have legislations in our appellations that are very strict, whereas in the new world, we have tools at our disposal that can manage climate change. I'm thinking of irrigation or the ability to bring fruits from outside of the AVA. Napa, for example, can be 75% Napa and 75% of the designated varietal in the bottle. Well, that helps a lot to manage things.
It's interesting where you wound up, because in addition to those differences, the new world and the old world, is the reality that in the old world, at least the premium wines, in fact, any of the good wines, are named by the location as opposed to the varietal. In the new world, they're named by the varietal. So, in the Willamette Valley, you can go up the hillside if you want to. Romanée-Conti moves across the road. It's not, DRC no longer has Romanée-Conti, at least can't call it that. Mark, this is a perfect foundation to turn to you to ask you what action Gallo, a very important wine producer, is taking in the face of current climate change, as well as your anticipation about future climate change.
Sure. Thanks, Rob. Well, first, I just want to say this is what a great event. Happy to be here. Thanks for having us and me. I'll say I've been at Gallo for over 20 years, all in the finance area. I've been our CFO for the past 3 years, but early in my career, I worked in what we call our wine and grape supply area, which is focused on investing in vineyards and what grapes do we want, contracts, and looking at long-term supply and demand. And I saw through that role the power of Gallo's relationship with the academic groups across the world. And some of whom are here, and so I'll talk a little bit about that as it relates to climate change. But I do want to say, even this event, I think there might be opportunities for how can the industry and Gallo specifically better partner with with the academic world beyond just in the viticulture area. So I'm excited about what the future might hold there. But related specifically to climate change and sustainability, Gallo's approach is really driven with two guiding principles in mind. Number one, what can we control? And number two, what's going to have the biggest impact? Because sometimes with something as broad and challenging as climate change, it's easy to focus on things you can't control or things that maybe don't have much of an impact. So that's key to our approach. From a long-term standpoint, one key to managing the potential risk of climate change, like any good economist, diversification is a key part of that. One thing that Gallo, does, we, source from a number of different locations, both within California, within the world, where we locate our facilities, on down the, even what categories do we invest in. Diversification is something we can control for the long term. In the short term, as we think about climate change, we really think about, how do we manage and take action that is significant within a couple different domains. So both in the vineyard, in our wineries, in our packaging, and in our route to market. So I'll just touch on a few of those specific things that we do within each one of those. Within the vineyard, we do a lot. Big focus on how do we think about our water usage. How do we think about managing rising temperatures, more extreme events? How do we better measure the impacts of smoke taint so that we can damage less total wine than otherwise would get damaged? There's a lot that we do in the vineyard and managing the changes we're seeing there. In the winery, there's also a lot we do. One thing to call out, taking an economic approach, we've looked at the cost of water. And sometimes when we look at long-term or our capital projects, sometimes the cost of water is assumed at zero. We know that's not the case. We know even long-term, we think there's a bigger gain from lower water usage, something we focus a lot in. So we've put in place an internal cost on water with an incentive to drive more capital projects to reduce water. Today, we measure it, and roughly it's 3 to 1 in terms of water usage to gallons of water to a gallon of wine. And we're constantly looking to how can we reduce that both in the vineyard and in the winery. On a packaging standpoint, we focus a lot on, we own our own glass plant, which is great. It's at our facility, and so it reduces the movement of glass. But we've struggled to get more recycled content into our glass plant. And so over the past 2 years, we've invested heavily in putting in place our own recycling center, where we are buying the cullet, we are running it through a process to get more recycled glass that we can then increase the recycled content into our glass. And then lastly, in route to market, a big use of carbon in our industry is moving of liquid, moving of glass, moving our product is heavy. How can we reduce that? We've focused on shifting, within the U.S. to more rail and less truck through an RDC or a distribution network. And then globally, we focused on how do we ship more through in bladders and tankers, export bulk wine and then bottle closer to location where that product is sold. So those are some of the things that we've done.
Great, thank you for that. So this is a good point at which to turn to Laura, because you've been, if I'm correct about this, I think you've been outspoken about the importance of wineries partnering with research institutions, and particularly local research. So I'd love it if you could say something about that, and in the process maybe comment on the Catena Institute of Wine, which you founded in 1995, I believe.
So first of all, who's been to Argentina? Raise your hand. Oh, okay. This is one of the good crowds. All the ones who haven't gone, please make a trip to Argentina. It's so beautiful. I want to actually invite everybody to the International Terroir Symposium, where there was going to be people from all over the world, from UC Davis, Burgundy, Italy, 18 to 22nd of November 2024, where we're going to talk about a lot of these things. So now to answer the question. Well, the first thing is I love to tell people that study whatever you like, because at some point it's going to become useful. And I actually was at Harvard undergrad in the 80s and decided to go into medicine, and was determined that I was going to be a flying doctor, not a flying winemaker, traveling around the world. And then I ended up getting passionate about our family winery that's been around since 1902. And I found this passion for research at the winery, because I didn't know how to sell wine. I knew a lot about science from being a medical doctor. And to tell all of you here who are probably in love with wine as a product, something you drink, but who I'm sure you're people who want to help the world in some way. And when I studied medicine, I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do because this is how I can help the most amount of people. And today I'm really convinced that I'm helping people with wine. It's not just because it gives us joy, it has some health benefits, but also because we are helping and supporting farming communities. There are so many people all over the world for generations who have worked in wine. There's so many people that have been drinking wine with their families. And I think that if we lose that, it's tragic for humanity. And so today I really feel that I am helping more people as a winemaker than I ever was as a doctor. So all of you stay in your course to wine, to making wine, or being connected to the wine industry. So now to answer the question finally. Okay, so the Catena Institute of Wine, I founded in 1995 because when I started in wine, I felt like there was a lot of blah, blah. You know, somebody would say, okay, my wine tastes like this because there's this kind of flower in my vineyard, and I felt like most people were making stuff up. And I thought it was important to know really what was true and what wasn't, because you know, we wanted to make the best wine. Our goal at the Catena Institute was to elevate Argentine wine. And I say Argentine wine and not just Catena, because to me, we really need to elevate everything together. We need to fight climate change together. We need to share information about, you know, like Marco has been all over the world, you know, sharing his gospel, UC Davis. And now to really answer your question, I mean, we have partnered with universities all over the world. In Argentina, locally, it's important because they are our people and they are who can do the day-to-day of the research. But many times, we have one of a person in Argentina. For example, we have one vineyard virus specialist. One. There is only one. How many vineyard virus specialists do you think there's in the US? 50? Yeah. We have one in Argentina. So this guy talks to Meyer at FPS, and he shares data with him. And we collaborated with this group, Micro Wine. It was all over Europe. They had people in the U.S. Were you part of Micro Wine? It was a microbial study research project that ended about 5 years ago. And we got so much information that helped us in what we're trying to do in Argentina. So to answer your question, I think every winery in the world needs to have some kind of a research program, no matter what your size, because climate change is moving so quickly that you really can't make decisions without using some science. So in terms of how the Catena Institute works, our vision is to use science to preserve nature and culture. And the reason we have nature is because you know, we live from the vine, and the vine is connected to the earth. Everything that's been spoken here, you know, the microbes in the soil, all these things that we need to study in order to preserve them. But it's also connected to culture. And I really think that if we don't act, the kids will leave for the cities. And this is an issue we have in Argentina. We're actually studying why people leave, why people stay, because otherwise, really, there is an exodus from the vineyards, and that's as significant an issue as, you know, what cover crop you're planting or how you're pruning. Just to mention a few of the projects we've worked on, which I think are so cool. For example, we did a study when one of our people was at UC Davis, which was to look at the terroir of Malbec in California and Argentina, and it was a collaborative project. And it was actually the first sort of across-continent study on terroir for one variety that had ever been done. And Hildegard Heimann, who is a sensory analysis specialist, trained somebody in our team, first one person, then a second person, so that we can now do sensory analysis to answer other questions, to look at other varieties. And, you know, this is basically, you know, the number one university, I think, in the world, UC Davis. If there's French people, don't be offended, but that's what I think, you know, was helping us in Argentina to answer our questions. We're also part of a project that Burgundy is doing, the University of Burgundy, on Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. We are their site for South America. So they send us a graduate student, and we look at the behavior of Chardonnay across altitude, because we have high altitude. And, you know, as Marco was talking about, this is a really important climate change solution. We've collaborated over microbial studies with Micro Wine, which was this group all over Europe, the US, looking at microbes and yeast in the soil. There's no way we can do Illumina studies in Mendoza because there's not even an Illumina machine in Mendoza. How many are at the UCs? Think of the UCs. Probably 100 Illumina? No, more. I don't know. But it's like, to look at DNA. We're now doing a study of the genetics of Malbec.
That's been great, Laura, because you've really emphasized for us and for everyone here the importance of research and working with different institutions as you are around the world. But now on the panel, we're going to turn some real researchers and hear the perspective from their work. And we're going to start with Beth Forrestel, who's an ecophysiologist working at the University of California, Davis. And, a lot of what is said, Beth, when people talk about climate change, at some year in the future, they say, well, what will be the average participation in that year? What will be the average temperature in that year for a given month, obviously? But work that you have done has focused on a very important reality, and that's thinking about the extremes of climate change, not necessarily the mean. Can you say something about that? And in particular, of course, what are the implications for wine production?
Sure. So coming from an ecological background and frankly from a non-academic background too, speaking to what Laura said, I think it's important to recognize that collaborative work in this space to resolve these issues is absolutely critical. I came from I was a scientist, came from a culinary background, boat building background, doing all these other things, and realized I wanted to be an academic, but only in the space of viticulture. And so I see working with this diverse group of people as being really relevant to solving climate change. And so the vast majority of my work to date, and I'm a relatively new professor, has been trying to understand cultivar suitability and how we can adapt to change in the future. And what I was beginning to realize is that looking at just mean change and trying to match cultivars to different regions is problematic because of how many extreme events we've had and how diverse they can be even within one region. So my work is largely based in the Central Valley of California and in Napa. I'm at UC Davis. But if we think about what's happened in the last 5 years even, we can, along the West Coast, look at, for example, in the last 5 years, we've had 2 vintages in the Okanagan that were lost to cold snaps. The amount of yield loss due to frosts that was just spoken about too is much larger, even within Napa, where we don't even think about it being an issue because of spring frosts. Smoke, a huge issue. We need to think about when we want grapes to ripen so we can avoid some of those really intense fire seasons. And then heat extremes, which is the focus of my work. And when we speak to things like phenolic ripeness, we really need to think about heat extremes more than just accumulation of heat throughout the season and growing degree days. And so we've had huge losses. When we think about the economics of it, we attribute losses of yields due to extreme events, not mean climate change. So the International Organization of Wine and Vine put out a report a few months ago now, and it was the first time, so between 2022 and 2023, so OIV is an organization, I'll say first. It has about 50 member nations. The US has recently joined. It accounts for over 70% of all production of grapes and wine in the world. And they put out a report every year about the previous year's vintage or production. And this is the first year talking about 2023 where they actually attributed the 10% decrease in yield to extreme climate events and also to disease, fungal disease specifically. Marco's work in that space. Pruning, I will say, is one of the most important practices in terms of thinking about disease and management in general. But it was really striking to see this, and that's between 2022 and 2023, a 10% decrease in some of the yields. And you can attribute largely to extreme climate events. And so when we think about the future where you might have a cold snap, fires, and a heat wave all within one season, we really have to think about how to adapt to that in the context of the genetics of the vine and what it can adapt to, and in terms of thinking about management practices, and that's a huge piece, is how do we use water appropriately? At what time do we use it? And so I think we have to rethink not just about whether a cultivar belongs in a region, but how well it's suited for different extremes and how we can manage to that. And I think some of that future will be breeding, but on the short term, we need to think about, okay, we know we have Cabernet planted here. How robust is it? It's an extremely robust cultivar. But when we have a situation like 2022 in California, where in September you saw temperatures go up to upwards of 45 degrees Celsius or 115 in one region, and you saw, and we're talking about phenolic ripeness, you saw the phenolics, and so one thing I do is actually try and predict quality parameters. So anthocyanins is a big parameter I'm most interested in with climate change. Within a 5-day period, you saw across I work with about 60 growers across Napa to assess this. You saw in many of the vineyards the phenolic ripeness go from what you see at peak phenolic ripeness or peak content of anthocyanins and tannins at about 22 to 23 bricks, go down to what you see at 12 bricks. So you saw this precipitous decline with one heat wave event. And so I think being able to understand what we can do in the vineyard and also how we select cultivars to be able to actually adapt to that is something that's a really, really critical issue. And it really does, it's a collaborative effort between different kinds of research, winemakers in the winery and the vineyard. It's a really critical issue. So,
great, thank you for that. Building now from what I'll describe broadly as the natural science side of wine, there's also, of course, the economics of wine. But today, in almost all the sessions and with a lot of the videos that we've seen, the focus has really been on the premium wines of the world. In fact, some of the super duper premium wines of the world. But most of the wine production in the world, Dan, as you well know, is not premium wines. It's the lower priced wines. So that's an extremely important category. And the question, therefore, is, from your work, can you say something about the economics of climate change on that part of the wine sector?
Yeah, I'll do that. It's never popular because it's more fun to talk about the wine that's fun to drink than the wine we really do drink but wish we didn't. But Brad Rickard got away with talking about beer, so the other thing I want to reinforce is the role of economists in all this is working closely with all the scientists, whether they're hydrologists or climatologists or plant physiologists, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things we're fortunate about at Davis is we have a bunch of great scientists that actually want to work with economists, which is a real treat. And so when we think, so in California, those of you that know the country there, talking about premium wines versus wines that most people drink is talking about the Central Valley versus the coast. Now, it's not quite that simple everywhere else in the world, but there's lots of places in the world where you know the geography and that tells you the story, and partly because it's a bit of simpler geography. The other thing about it is for the cheaper wines, it's probably less complicated. Let me say, the effect of climate change on corn and soybeans is complicated too, right. and tomatoes that go into pizza sauce, that's complicated too. And so it's also complicated and probably even more complicated for those than say in Central California wines. There are a couple of things where I think the cheaper wines face things that are a little bit different. And one is, for example, smoke taint and fire. We're less likely to get smoke taint in big flat areas without a lot of foothills and hillsides all around. That's certainly true in California, and I think we'll find that many places in the world, even in Australia where wildfire damage is so threatening to vineyards as well. So there are certain issues. I've been spending a lot of time on smoke taint which puts me in Napa and Sonoma. It doesn't put me in Fresno. The other thing to point out is, and this applies to premium wine, but especially to the bulk wines, is that wine is being shipped all over the world, and that means, and Gallo knows, of course, very well, wine in the Central Valley of California is also competing with Argentine wine. Not your wines, but low-priced Argentine wines that arrives on the east coast of the United States in a 70-liter container. And for climate change reasons, for reducing carbon reasons, you'll want to package that, maybe not bottle it, but package it here on the east coast of the United States. You don't want to haul it to Modesto to package it, to ship it back. So this competition between wines all over the world means that we will not only adapt varieties, there'll be places in the world that are affected less than others. So you could say, I could say, for example, maybe Fresno's going to be better off for wine, even though wine growing conditions are worse in Fresno than they used to be, because it will develop a comparative advantage just for yield relative to Argentina or Chile or someplace in the world that is competing with them for that bulk wine. That'll happen. That may happen between Napa and Bordeaux on a quality spectrum, not on a yield spectrum. And when I talk about yield, I'm often thinking, at least in California, we're thinking about yield per unit of water, not so much yield per unit of land. We may well be idling land in the middle of the Central Valley of California in general, partly because the price of almonds or the price of cotton. But unless California can do well as a comparative advantage sense, standard trade theory sense, relative to the other commodities in the world, that land will be idle. And one of the key factors there is that water, is the irrigation water that's put on. I grew up in the wine country of California with California crops, and I remember coming out to the eastern half of the United States and being shocked to see that people tried to farm where the rainfall actually fell on their field. What a pain in the ass. You know, if you couldn't control the water, why would you bother to farm? I was told that wasn't actually the way it worked most places. I didn't know that. But just the idea of comparative advantage, trade, competing for the land and water locally against the other commodities and competing against those commodities internationally is the way I think we have to think about wine remaining financially viable for most consumers in the world.
So that's very helpful and wonderful to hear you referred to comparative advantage, which is obviously so important. What drives international trade, although a bit less so nowadays, that we seem to be moving into a protectionist era in many parts of the world, including the country we're in. You brought up economics, which is interesting, and I want to pose an economics question, follow-up, but it's to Mark, because it's about something you said. You used the phrase, you said, we have imposed, quote, an internal cost of water, unquote. What does that mean?
Well, sometimes when you think about, should we invest in a project that reduces water usage? When you calculate the return on that, well, obviously it depends on what do you think the cost of water is. And sometimes the cost of water is assumed to be zero. Sometimes in a vineyard we'll use the cost to pump. So there's some electrical cost to energy to pull. But if you think about long term, if you think inflationary pressure on water, or the externality
Right.
in the future will get imposed on water.
Right.
What if we think about that today? What if we impose that today and then use that to drive internal decisions on water saving projects?
I got it.
So that's what we've done, and it's allowed us to think a little bit differently about what we should be investing in, and we've taken some aggressive actions on investing in how do we clean water, how do we actually get some how do we manage our wastewater, how do we drive projects that can reduce reuse water instead of just flushing it down the drain.
Thank you for that. Did you
I
want
just
follow
wanted
up
to
on
say
this?
10 seconds. Gallo's so big and so visible that they have to treat water differently than somebody with 100 acres of grapes somewhere. But partly because they'll actually affect things in a regional way, And even if they're not big enough to have an effect, they'll certainly have publicity about whatever they do. And so they have some things they have to think about that other wine growing companies don't yet have to think about.
I'd say have to and also choose to. It's one of those where, when you've been in the business, when you have a generational mindset, a sustainable approach is just ingrained in how you make decisions. And so it's not even it's not a challenge to think in those ways. We are thinking about, how do we ensure longevity and a generational mindset.
Well, you're warming the hearts of the economists in the room, because not only we heard the phrase comparative advantage, but then you said externalities, so that gets me very excited.
I just want to make a quick comment about water. Like in Argentina, we get our water from the glaciers, and we have a lot less water, both in the glaciers and underground. So one of the solutions is actually going to other regions, and so we're actually planting vineyards in other provinces that have different sources of water. But that's kind of tragic, actually, if you think about it, because it's, the main regions are either having less water or they're getting too hot. So I think it's another way to think of water is to look for it somewhere else. But it's tragic to think of it.
Thank you for that. So now we have time for questions for all of you. If you raise your hand, someone, I don't know who it is you're going to take the microphone. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Kevin. And I see a hand up. Is that way in the back of the room? Just wait for the microphone. If you could identify yourself, your name, and the institution that you're with and you can tell us who the question's posed to if it's for a specific individual.
Yes. Germán Puga, University of Adelaide. This question is for Jean-Baptiste. So you were talking about the new world and the old world and comparing them in terms of the advantage that the new world have in terms of choosing the varieties. And we have a very simple index that shows how concentrated countries are and how concentrated countries are becoming. And we can see that the new world is more concentrated on a few varieties and is becoming more concentrated. So at the same time, it looks like the new world is, I don't find a good word to say it, but kind of a prisoner of this marketing through varieties. And in the old world, they can actually change the varieties of the geographical indication, and it's not very fast, but they can do it. And because they do the marketing by geographical indication, they have this advantage of being able to put new varieties in the region, and consumers won't notice that. So what do you think about that? And I'm asking this as a genuine question because I don't have a strong opinion, but I would like to know what you think.
Thank you. Fascinating question. I'll try to be very quick. So by comparative advantage, I think we have to look at some specific aspects relating to climate change. One of them, as I said before, is irrigation. For the most part in Europe, in France, you cannot irrigate your vineyard after a certain age of growth. And that means that when you have extreme heat episodes, well, you're doomed with drought, that's it. Whereas some regions in the US, I'm thinking of California, for instance, they have this right to irrigate. And in fact, perhaps there is an over-irrigation in there, and when you stop irrigating, you may see that the plants react really well. But the mere fact that you can irrigate is a huge comparative advantage to basically face climate change. So specifically about varietals, I think you're absolutely spot on. The USA in particular have developed a marketing around varietals. You drink a Napa Cab, you drink Chardonnay. Wherever he's coming from, it's Chardonnay that you drink, right? Whereas for most regions, not all of them in Europe, you have the right to blend, and it's the base of the appellation is blending. So that could be considered as a competitive advantage when it comes to mitigating the effects of climate change, to that extent that, yeah, you may want to put more of a varietal than another in a blend if you want to retain freshness or the identity of the terroir. That being said, and I alluded to that, but perhaps really quickly, when you drink a Napa Cab, you generally don't just drink a Napa Cab. You might drink a blend of Cabernet and Merlot and Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc, of which most of it coming from Napa, but perhaps 25% coming from another region, right? 20%. So in reality, that tool exists in the US, but is not marketed as such.
But the AVA, sort of the U.S. equivalent of the appellation, does require, if it's called Cabernet, isn't there a requirement that some minimum percentage of the liquid must be from Cabernet grape?
75%. And when you think about it, it's a pretty low threshold.
Yes.
So it depends from one region to another, right? Oregon is a much higher threshold. It's 90%. But it is a very generous threshold. If you want, if on a very warm year, then why don't you put a little bit more of Cabernet Franc to get some of this freshness.
Right. So who would like to address what can the wine industry do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
We have an initiative with bottle weight.
Please.
I think is up to 60% of the carbon emissions are related to bottle weight. And we have this sort of conflict between, some of the heavier bottles at the higher end are what consumers in the Americas and Asia prefer. When I go to my Chinese importer and I say, here's my lighter weight bottle, he literally told me, he said, nobody here wants a lighter weight bottle, so don't talk about it. And in Latin America also, people are not as interested. In the US, in Europe, they are. So we basically decided to communicate with a quiz that people take. We teach them about bottle weight, and we've reduced 40% our total emissions through bottle weight, but we still have heavy bottles at the high end, which is a contradiction. But I decided, hey, we don't want to sell less wine. That's not sustainable of our higher end wines, but let's go educate one consumer at a time. It's the same thing we did with Malbec 25 years ago. Nobody knew Malbec. Now we're doing it with bottle weight. And the quiz has been the great intervention. This QR code, you take the quiz, then people love to take quizzes. They love to get questions wrong and learn something, and that's worked really well. I imagine you have an opinion.
From the viticultural side, there's a lot of work being done in the regenerative space. I would argue the jury's out as to how much carbon sequestration actually can be done in the vineyard, but I do know that, so vine longevity over the past century has gone down. How long we keep a vine in the vineyard. If you are pulling vines out every 25 years or 20 years and you have that amount of turnover, that actually is potentially an opportunity for sequestration if you keep vines in longer and you keep infrastructure in for longer. And then there's also vineyard floor management practices. I don't know if there's any representatives here for Jackson Family Wine, but Jackson Family Wine has done a lot of work in that space and understanding carbon sequestration. Gallo does some work in that space. But I think that's another opportunity, potentially, is maintaining cover crops, less tilling. I also think that's a mitigation strategy for heat waves, for thinking about that. So there is work being done in that space. But I'd say, again, the jury is still out in terms of how much you can get out of that.
You're certainly right to say the jury is out in terms of the biological carbon sequestration for vines. A big issue, of course, is if you do pull the vines out and replace them later, what do you do with them? Do you burn them? Do they rot? So we've got CO2 in one case, we've got CO2 and methane in the other case, or do you bury them underground, which is probably less likely. With that, I am going to get us close to being back on schedule by bringing the panel to a close. Before I thank them and I thank you, I want to acknowledge, or at least claim, that the fact that I'm wearing a tie is not symbolic that Harvard professors are excessively formal. It's because my students gave me this beautiful wine tie, and I don't have a lot of opportunities to wear a wine tie, so I thought today has got to be it. So that's why. But with that, first of all, I want to thank everyone here for your attention to this panel. Thank you for the questions. They were great questions. And most of all, please join me in thanking the stellar panel that we had.